Dev, Book 1, Chapter 4. Rama's Return from Pilgrimage. Valmiki speaking. Covered with flowers, thrown by people by the handful, Rama entered the palace. Just like when the beautiful Jayanta, the son of Indra, enters his celestial abode. On his arrival, Rama first bowed reverently before his father, then before Vashishta, before his brothers, his friends, the Brahmins, and the elderly members of the family. Repeatedly embraced as he was by friends, his father, mothers, and Brahmins, the son of Raghu bowed his head down to them with joy. The assembled people, after their familiar conversation with Rama in that palace, strolled about on all sides, highly delighted with his speech that resembled the music of a flute. Thus 8 days passed in festive mirth after Ram's return, and the elated multitude gave shouts of joy. Thereafter, Raghava continued to dwell happily at home, describing to his friends the different customs and manners of the countries he had visited on all sides. He rose early in the morning and performed his morning worship according to the law. Then he visited his father, seated like Indra in his council. He next passed a fourth part of the day in company with Vashishta and other sages, and was greatly edified by their conversations, which were full of instruction. For sport, he also used to go to the forest, full of boars and buffaloes, surrounded by a large number of troops, as ordered by his father. Then, after returning home and performing his bath and other rites with his friends, he took his meal with them and passed the night in company with his beloved companions. In these and similar activities, he passed his days with his brothers at his father's house after returning from pilgrimage. O sinless Bharadwaja, with his conduct becoming a prince, Ram passed his days, giving delight to the good men that surrounded him, like the moon that gladdens mankind with its soothing ambrosial beams. Chapter 5. Ram's Self-Dejection and its cause. Valmiki said, after Ram attained his 15th year of age, and Shatrughna and Lakshman, who followed Ram in age, also attained the same age, Bharata continued to dwell with joy at the house of his maternal grandfather, and King Dasaratha ruled the whole earth as usual. The most wise King Dasaratha consulted his ministers day after day about the marriage of his sons. But Ram remained at home. After his return from pilgrimage, he began to decay day by day, like a clear lake in autumn. His blooming face, with its outstretched eyes, assumed a paleness. by degrees, like that of the withering petals of the white lotus. Beset by a swarm of bees, he sat silent and motionless, his legs folded in full lotus position, Padmasana, absorbed in thought, with his palm placed under his cheek and neck, being emaciated in person and growing thoughtful, sad, and distracted in his mind. He remained speechless, like a mute figure in a painting. His family had to repeatedly ask him to perform his daily rites. And when he did, he discharged them with a sad face. Seeing the accomplished Ram, the mine of merits, in such a plight, all his brothers likewise were reduced to the same condition with him. The king of the earth, seeing all his 3 sons dejected and lean, became anxious. As he did all his queens, Dasaratha asked Rama repeatedly in a gentle voice what his anxiety was and what was the cause of his thoughtfulness. But Ram returned no answer. Then, being taken up in his father's lap, the lotus-eyed Ram replied that he had no anxiety whatever and held his silence. Afterwards, King Dasaratha asked Vashishta, the best of speakers and well informed in all matters, as to why Ram was so sorrowful. Sage Vashishta thought over the matter and said, "There is, O king, a cause for Ram's sadness, but you need not be anxious about it. Wise men never entertain the fluctuations of anger or grief, or of a lengthened delight from frivolous causes. Just as the great elements of the world do not change their states unless it were for the sake of some new production." Chapter 6. Vishwamitra arrives in the royal court. Valmiki speaking. The king was thrown into sorrow and suspense at these words of Vashishta, the prince of sages, but kept his silence for some time and waited. Meanwhile, the queens of the palace kept close on Ram's movements with anxious carefulness. At this very time, the famous and great sage Vishwamitra came to visit the king of men at Ayodhya. The intelligent and wise sage had his sacrificial rites disturbed by Rakshasa demons, who were deceitfully powerful and giddy with their strength. The sage came to visit the king in order to obtain protection for his sacrifice, because he was unable to complete it in peace by himself. The illustrious Vishwamitra, the gem of austere worship, had come to the city of Ayodhya for the destruction of the Rakshasas. Desirous of seeing the king, Vishwamitra told the guards at the gate to report to the king that Kausika, that is Vishwamitra, the son of Gadi, had arrived. On hearing these words, the gods were struck with fear in their minds and ran as they were bid to the palace of the king. Coming to the royal abode, the doorkeepers informed the chief warder that Vishwamitra, the royal sage, had arrived. The staff-bearer immediately presented himself before the king, who was seated among his princes and chiefs in the courthouse. The staff-bearer reported, "Please, your majesty, waiting at the door is a mighty person of majestic appearance, bright as the morning sun, with pendant locks of hair like sunbeams. The brilliance of his body has brightened the place from the topmost flag down to the ground, and made the horses, men, and armory shine with a golden color." As soon as the warder appeared before the king, and with hurried words announced the arrival of the sage Vishwamitra, the best of kings, surrounded by all the ministers and chiefs, rose at once from his throne of gold, attended by Vashishta and Vamadeva, and his staff of princes and chiefs, by whom he held in honor and regard. The king immediately walked to where the great sage was waiting, and saw Vishwamitra, the chief of sages, standing at the gate. Vishwamitra's priestly prowess, joined with his military valor, made him appear as if the sun had descended on earth for some reason. He was hoary with old age, rough-skinned by the practice of austerities, and covered down to his shoulders with bright red braids of hair that resembled evening clouds over the mountain of its brow. He was mild-looking and engaging in appearance, but at the same time as brilliant as the orb of the sun. He was neither assuming nor repulsive, but possessed of an ineffable gravity and majesty in his person. He was attractive yet formidable in appearance, clear yet vast in mind, deep and full in knowledge, and shining with inner light. His lifetime, he had no limit. His mind had no bounds, and age had not impaired his understanding. He held an ascetic's pot in one hand, his only faithful companion in life. The compassion of his mind added to the sweet complacency of his speech and looks, pleased people as if they were actually served nectar drops or sprinkled with ambrosial dew. His body, decorated by the sacred thread, and his prominent white eyebrows made him appear as a wonder to the eyes of his beholders. On seeing the sage, the Lord of earth lowly bowed from a distance, bowing so low that the gems hanging from his crown decorated the ground. In his turn, the sage immediately greeted the Lord of the earth with sweet and kind words, like the sun greeting the Lord of gods. Afterward, the assembled Brahmins of the court, headed by Vashishta, honored him with their welcomes. The king said, "O holy sage, we are as highly favored by your unexpected appearance and your glorious sight as a bed of lotuses at the sight of the luminous sun. O sage, I feel unending happiness at your appearance, which knows no bounds. This day we must be placed at the front rank of the fortunate, as we have become the object of your arrival." With these and similar conversations that went on among the princes and sages, They proceeded to the court hall, where they took their respective seats. The king, awed by seeing the best of sages, Vishwamitra, with his cheerful face and so very prosperous in his asceticism, felt some hesitation to offer the honorary gift reward himself. But the sage accepted the argya water offered him by the king and hailed the king as the king walked around the sage according to the rules of the scripture. Thus honored by the king, he with a cheerful countenance asked the court of men about the good health of himself and family and the fullness of his finances. Then, coming in contact with Vasishtha, the great sage, saluted him with a smile, as he deserved, and asked him about his health and those in his hermitage. After their interview and exchanges of due courtesies that lasted for a while to the satisfaction of all in the royal assembly, they both took their respective seats. Everyone in the court respectfully greeted the sage of exalted prowess. After Vishwamitra was seated, they made various offerings of padya, water to wash the feet, argya, and cattle to him. Having honored Vishwamitra in due form, the Lord of Men addressed him in submissive terms, with the gladdest mind, his palms pressed open against each other. He said, "Sage, your coming here makes me as grateful as one who obtains nectar, as rainfall after a drought, and as the blind gains sight. Again, it is as delightful to me as a childless man who gets a son by his beloved wife, or as gaining possession of a treasure in a dream. Your arrival is no less pleasing to me than meeting with the object of one's wishes, the arrival of a friend, and the recovery of something that was given for loss. It gives me joy, like that derived from the sight of a deceased friend suddenly returning by way of the sky. It is thus, O holy Brahman, that I welcome your visit to me. Who is there who would not be glad to live in heaven? O sage, I feel so happy at your arrival. And this I tell you truly. What is your best pleasure? What may I do for you, O scholar, who is the best of the virtuous and most properly deserving of my services? Formerly, you had been famed under the title of Royal Sage, but since, made glorious by dint of your asceticism, you have been promoted to the rank of a Brahma Rishi. Therefore, you are truly the object of my worship. I am so glad at your sight that my inner soul is soothed. Just like bathing in the Ganges River cheers the mind. Free as you are from fears and desires, from wrath and passions, and from the feelings of pleasure, pain, and disease, it is very wonderful, O holy Brahman, that you should have need of me for anything. I consider myself as situated at a holy sanctuary and absolved from all my sins or as emerged in the lunar sphere, O best of the learned in the truths of the Vedas. I understand your appearance as that of Brahma himself before me. I confess myself, O sage, to be purified and favored by your arrival. Indeed, I am so grateful at your arrival that I deem myself fortunate in this birth, and that I have not lived in vain, but led a truly good life. Since I saw you here and made my respectful obeisances to you, my heart cannot contain itself, but overflows with joy, like the sea at the sight of the moon. Whatever may be the purpose of your visit, O greatest of sages, know it is already granted, for your commands are always to be obeyed by me. You need not hesitate to communicate your request to me, O descendant of Kusika. If you ask, there is nothing I will keep from you. You need not doubt my performance. I solemnly state that I will execute your request to the last item, as I take you to be the light of a superior divinity. Upon hearing these sweet words from the king, pleasing to the ears and delivered with humility, worthy of one knowing himself, the far-famed and notorious chief of the sages felt highly gratified in himself. Vishwamitra asked for Rama's help. Valmiki speaking. After the illustrious Vishwamitra had heard the unusually lengthy speech from the lion among kings, his hairs stood erect with joy. He said, "This speech is worthy of you, O best of kings on earth, and one descended from a royal race and guided by sage Vashishta himself. Consider well, O king, the deed which I have in mind and support the cause of virtue. I am employed, O chief of men, in religious acts for attainment of my consummation. But the horrible Rakshasa demons have become my great obstruction. Whenever I offer sacrifices to the gods in any place, instantly these nocturnal demons appear to destroy my sacrificial rites. On very many occasions, when I commence my ceremonies, the Rakshasa chiefs fling heaps of flesh and blood on the sacrificial ground, thus being obstructed by my sacrificial duties. I now come to you with a broken spirit, having labored in vain to complete the rites. The vows of the rites prevent me from giving vent to my anger by curses. Such being the sacrificial law, I expect your favor to gain its great object in peace. Thus, oppressed, I have recourse to your protection, and you should protect me. Otherwise, it is an insult for petitioners to be disappointed by the best of men as yourself. You have a son, a beautiful Ram, powerful as a fierce tiger and strong as the great Indra himself. He is able to destroy the Rakshasas. May you now deliver Ram, your eldest son, to me. Having his youthful locks of hair like the black plumage of a crow, but possessing the true valor of a hero, protected under my sacred authority and by his prowess, he will be able to sever the heads of the malicious Rakshasas. I will do him an infinity of good services, whereby in the end he will become adored by the inhabitants of all three worlds. The night wandering Rakshasas cannot abide in the field before Ram, but must fly like stags in the wilderness before a furious lion. No man other than Ram can make bold to fight with the Rakshasas, just as no animal other than a furious lion can stand to fight wild elephants. Elated with their strength, these victorious beings have become like poisoned shafts in fighting. Being delegates of the demons Kara and Dushana, they are furious as death itself. They cannot, O tiger among kings, be able to sustain the arrows of Ram, but must settle like flying dust under the ceaseless showers of his arrows. Let not paternal affection prevail over you, O king, as there is nothing in this world which the high-minded will refuse to part with. I know it for certain, and you also should know, that the Rakshasas must be destroyed by him. Wise men like ourselves never undertake an uncertainty. I well know the great soul of the lotus-eyed Ram, and so does the illustrious Vishishta, and all others who are far-seeing. Should the sense of greatness, duty, and renown have a seat in your soul, you should deliver my desired object to me, your son. It will take 10 nights to perform the rites of my sacrifice, during which Ram shall have to stay with me and kill the Rakshasas, who are obnoxious to my rites and the enemies of the sacrifices. O King Dasaratha, let the ministers, headed by Vashishta, join and give their assent, and deliver your Ram to me. O descendant of Raghu, you know that auspicious times must not be allowed to slip away. So you must not allow my time to slip. So I may have Ram, be blessed, and do not give way to sorrow. Even the smallest service, if done in good time, appears to be much, and the best service is of no avail if done out of season. Vishwamitra, the illustrious and holy chief of the sages, paused after saying these words, filled with virtuous and useful intention. Hearing these words of the great sage, the magnanimous king held his silence for some time, with a view to prepare a fitting answer, because no man of sense is ever satisfied with talking unreasonably before others or to himself. Well, we have seen an interesting few chapters. Let's think about what they mean. At the beginning of today's reading, in chapter 4, Ram returned from his pilgrimage, and he was greeted very delightfully by everyone. But then he turned inward. So he went through a period of happiness and elation, feeling great fulfillment from his ambitious pilgrimage. Then he turned dejected and saddened, and he wouldn't speak. He turned inward. So what does that mean? Well, he had just had a great adventure and seen many things in the dream world of this universe. And upon reflecting on all that he had seen, he realized that did not give him true fulfillment. So, having exhausted the outward appearance and the outer senses, he decided to look within and see what is going on. Why was he not fulfilled? And he began to ponder this lack of fulfillment from the outer world. Now, this is an indication of someone who is turning the corner in his lifetime, ready to look for true meaning of life. And the only way to look after spending all this time looking out is to look within. It also shows that Ram had a mature intellect, and he had very rapidly exhausted his search for fulfillment in the relative illusory universe. While other people, like the king and all the people in the royal court, they were still engaged in finding fulfillment in the relative world, weren't they? Because when they saw that Ram was dejected and apparently saddened and only sitting and pondering and going within, they thought, well, must be something wrong with the boy. But when they asked Vishwamitra, he said, there's nothing wrong. We'll find out in due time what's going on. Because Vishwamitra understood what Ram was going through. And then by coincidence, yet nothing happens by coincidence, here comes Vishwamitra, who was performing some rituals, basically doing some meditations, and was being disturbed by Rakshasas. So let's ponder that for a moment. Vishwamitra is seen as a shining light. He's very auspicious, his appearance. Everyone was so excited to see him, it was obvious. He was well advanced on the path of self-realization. In fact, he was even identified as a Brahma Rishi. Rishi is the Sanskrit word that means knower. So he was a knower of Brahma. Vishwamitra was apparently in Brahman consciousness. But yet, what was going on? He was still meditating. He was still being assailed by Rakshasas. So what are Rakshasas? They are expressions of individual karmic traces. So here we have someone who's in Brahman consciousness, yet he is still meditating and he is still being disturbed by individual karmic traces. So how do we understand that? Well, the process of achieving moksha is in 5 levels. The first level is moksha level 1, called cosmic consciousness. And the hallmark of this level of moksha is one is established in the silent witness 24 hours a day. Even during deep sleep. Of course, all dreams are lucid dreams. But even when the dreams stop, when the mind stops working at all, when there is nothing going on in the consciousness of the individual, the witnessing of that silence remains. This is cosmic consciousness, 24/7 witnessing from the level of the silent witness. So how is that possible? As we said, we can't achieve moksha until all the karmic traces are balanced. Well, it's true, and yet there's a condition. Cosmic consciousness arises when one is able to witness 24 hours a day the divine karmic traces. These are the actions, activities taken by the creator of the universe to create the universe. This could also be called a Vedic cognition, when one cognizes or witnesses or observes the activities of the impulses of creative intelligence that are at the foundation of the universe. Something is still going on in awareness. In order to witness these divine karmic traces, there has to be a gap in, at least a gap in the individual karmic traces. I like to think of it as a tunnel. We have, all of us, as dream creatures in this universe, inherited from our ancestors, from our parents, from the parents of our parents. We know well how life comes into being. A little bit of DNA from one parent and a little bit from another combines, and DNA is the host of individual karmic traces they cling to it. So when we're born with tremendous individual karmic traces to balance, not just a little bit from the last life. This universe has been in existence for 150 trillion years. It began with one couple. Our life, our heritage, began with one of 10 couples created out of the mind of the Creator. Lord Brahma did not create you and me directly from his mind. He only created our ultimate ancestors directly from his mind. Just poof, like magic, and they appeared in the universe as true, pure, first primordial dream creatures. And they were given the impulse to procreate, which they did. There were 10 of these couples, many of them having tens of thousands of children in their long lifetime. They lived for over 100,000 years. And as these new beings were created from the procreation process, they made some mistakes, creating some karmic traits, which they passed on in their DNA to their progeny, who were a little bit less bright, more distracted by these karmic traces, making even more mistakes. So you see how it goes. Like a snowball rolling down a mountain. It just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until we have mountain ranges of karma to deal with in this lifetime. It's a little bit discouraging because how in the world are we ever going to meditate enough to balance mountain ranges of karma? Think about the Himalayas or the Rocky Mountains or the Swiss Alps, how huge and imposing those structures are. If that is our karma, then we don't have a chance to ever get enlightened in this lifetime. How could we possibly balance all that karma? So we have a strategy. That is to focus on a particular bundle of karma, a particular vein of rocks that goes all the way through the mountain to the other side where the sun is brightly shining and waiting for us. So we have a number of techniques that we employ to balance this particular tunnel of karma. We use what is called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is very effective at balancing particular aspects of our karma. And when successful at balancing just a little bit of the karma, we open up this tunnel, and the tunnel is so big that eventually we can see the divine karmic traces through this tunnel. And then we have the ability to witness, to stay connected with the silent witness 24/7. Because what keeps us out of this connection with the silent witness are the activities, the distractions of our individual karmic traces. And so moksha level 1 dawns. Tomorrow we'll get into the other levels of moksha, how they arise, and how this section from the Yoga Vasishta is able to convey a vision of all that. Jai Gurudev.